Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and I can't talk. Everyone, like my tongue literally got tied up. Good afternoon. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. Welcome to Success Without Schools. This is the show where we talk about how students can succeed in this world without attending school as we know it, whether it's homeschool, microschool, or some other combination of hybrid thing. In other words, it doesn't have to be the same thing you had growing up. So my co-host Hannah Frankman and I meet up here every week and we talk about these things. If it's your first time at the channel, please consider, liking, sharing, subscribing so you can be notified when we do broadcasts like this. And definitely like and share this broadcast specifically, even if you are already a subscriber, so other people can join us in the conversation. We get some lively conversations going on during the show, and we love that. This is meant to be interactive. And I will make a plug. I don't do this often, but if you support the work that I do, please consider becoming a member of the Locals, Substack, Subscribestar, Patreon. Your support is appreciated. So appreciated. So let's dive into this topic today. This is something that we sort of touched on last week, Hannah, a little tiny bit. We were talking about kids working, getting those jobs. And you mentioned that there are ways that they can network and improve their chances of getting hired and, the people might be aware of. So I'm going to turn this over to you because you're the expert in this area. And I'm taking more of like the parent role, listening and taking notes. So go for it. How can kids network?
Much more effectively than people realize when they think about kids networking. They think like, wait, what? Isn't that an adult thing? But
Yeah.
Kids are actually very naturally good at it quite often when left to their own devices, and they can build a really solid network in the areas that they're interested in.
Right.
Long before they're like quote unquote qualified to enter the adult world. I'm really excited to delve into this actually, because I think I'd love to do some like maybe even some like real world case studies, like if there are examples that have come across and that you've come across in your network, or like with your own girls, if there are things that like situations that we could kind of break down in the hypothetical and talk about. I feel like this is like the kind of thing that you can talk about theoretically.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel like it's actually more valuable to talk about like specific scenarios of, okay, this kid's
Right.
interested in this thing. How do we help that kid build a really robust network of experts in the spaces that they're interested in that can help them build skill in the areas that they want to develop?
I would love that. And I mean, what I would want to put out there as a parent, though, just from my own personal experience, it's anecdotal, but here it goes, is that I think the biggest impediment to networking for any person of any age is sort of temperament and personality. What I mean by that is that, I don't care how old you are, if you are, I hate to use the word shy, but if you're not, really comfortable, reaching out, I hate to use the term, but
You're not
reaching
an
out.
exceptionally outgoing person.
Yeah, if you're not an exceptionally outgoing
Feeds
person,
on
or if
meeting
you
people.
if you're not very good at initiating conversations with people you don't know, have never met, if that whole prospect kind of scares you, if you carry around anything resembling an imposter complex, or like, any kind of insecurity that says, why would they want to talk to me? Or, I don't know them, or surely that's going to result in some kind of laughing or rejection or whatever. And of course, those kinds of feelings tend to be more pronounced, if they're going to be present at all, in a teenager. Right. And that's not to say you don't have some really gregarious teenagers who are willing to just walk up to a stranger and talk to them. Those kids exist. But I can almost guarantee there are parents sitting out there who, before we even get started, are sitting there going, yeah, my kid barely wants to go to an interview. Like, there's, even if they don't need the network, if they're like, there's a big "we're hiring" sign outside, they're shaking in their shoes about having to go out and present themselves and answer questions of a complete stranger. That makes them nervous. And by the way, guys, that's everybody. That's public school kids, that's homeschool kids. This is a personality or temperament thing.
Yeah.
I would even say, maybe you would agree, that kids who are homeschooled might have a slight edge on this because they've been sort of out in the world a little bit more, talking to strangers more from the time they were little.
Yeah.
But it's still something that comes down to, do you have that kind of get up and go or don't you? And so one thing I would ask of you explaining this to us is kind of like, do you have any tips to help those kids or help the
Yeah.
parents help their kids get over that hump? You mentioned last time in the show, which I thought was really helpful, that adults find it really impressive.
Yeah.
Like so if you can convey that to your child, that like, I know you might think that they don't want to talk to you, but they'll actually like really excited to talk to you, or they think they'll be like just so, happy to speak to a young person, or they'll be flattered or whatever. So anything you can say to that effect, because I know there are gonna be people going, oh, they're gonna be scared to do this. So if you can factor that in, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. I'm gonna tailor this directly to the kid.
Okay. Perfect.
So if you're a young person who is excited about a specific field or a specific industry or a specific type of work, it's very easy to underestimate how interesting your interest is to the people who are already working in that space. It's very impressive to an adult established professional to see a young person who's a go-getter, who knows what they want and who is curious about the field that they're working in. It's impressive to them. It's also really exciting to them because they love sharing what they do, and they love helping young people, especially young people who remind them of what they were like when they were young. And if you're interested in their field, probably you remind them of what they were like when they were young, because they were probably curious about it too. So your probability of having people respond to you is actually way higher because you're young. I had a conversation a couple months ago with a friend of mine who is a very successful online writer, has tens of thousands of people subscribed to his newsletter, gets responses all the time from people who read his newsletter and want to interact with him. And he was telling me all about this 17-year-old who responded to his newsletter and wanted to set up a call asking for advice for becoming a writer. And he was just like, yeah, I'm going to talk to him tomorrow. It was like the weekend, and he was making time in his busy schedule to talk to this kid because he was so impressed that this 17-year-old had reached out with really specific, well thought out questions about building a career as a writer. And this is a guy who, again, he gets hundreds of emails in his inbox all of the time. People all over the world want to talk to him. He's very successful. But the fact that this young person was hungry, he immediately had his attention. He was immediately impressed. And I think I want to be careful about how I'm framing this, because I don't want people to listen to this and think, well, I have to be impressive and I'm not impressive enough. No, you don't have to engineer being impressive. The fact that you care enough to reach out in the first place is what makes you impressive. And obviously there are some like bare minimum bars that you need to hit to get a response. Like you have to make sure that your inquiry, if it's a written inquiry, is well written, that like the spelling and the grammar is correct. You want to make sure you're putting in the time to put your absolute best foot forward, but you don't have to overthink it either. It's not like, well, I need to like wait 6 months and start a blog and make sure I've written like 20 posts on the blog and then I can reach out to this writer. No, it's okay to like, yeah, they'll be impressed if you're doing stuff, but also don't be afraid to reach out. And I think in the age of the internet, it's a lot easier actually, because you don't have to go knock on somebody's door and then be nervous about who's going to answer. You don't have to pick up the phone and wonder like who's going to respond on the other line. Maybe you're going to get the person you don't want to talk to. Maybe you're going to get their mother. Maybe you're going to get their wife. And you're like, I don't even know who you are. And now I feel super awkward. Like it's really easy to send somebody a Twitter DM, send somebody an Instagram DM, send somebody an email, and just formulate a couple really specific questions. Like if you just introduce yourself, you give a short paragraph on who you are, what your background is, what you're working on, why you care about this person's work, and then a couple well thought out questions where it's not like, the more specific you can be, the better, because again, it indicates that you're paying attention and you've thought through this stuff. You're not asking just generic, like, I don't know, I'm actually having trouble coming up with a generic question. Like, what is your top piece of advice for somebody who wants to be a writer?
Right.
And something a little more specific, like, I want to get into this type of writing, and I'm really curious how you learned about this. Like, I really admire this specific part of your writing, and I'm wondering how you did that. Or like, I want to become a writer with this specific niche, and I'm wondering where you'd recommend I start building a brand or a following. Like, slightly more specific questions go a really long way because they indicate that you're paying attention and you care. And if you do that, if you send a message to your hero or a person who is even like somebody who's locally working on something that you're interested in, and you'd love to shadow them for a day, or you'd love to have coffee with them and get to ask them questions about how they built their career, you're probably going to get a yes, because people are really impressed by that. Like, I, as a 25-year-old, could send the exact same email, and my likelihood of getting a response would be lower than a teenager sending that email, because the age makes a difference.
Without a doubt. And if you're my age, people are like, loser. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I've been writing.
And they're like, what do you mean you need my help? What's wrong with you?
Like, I know how to write a well-crafted email, and I would still choose the chances of somebody writing their very first cold email at 17, because it's just really impressive to people.
It's also rare.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. It's also rare. The vast majority of people are either haven't seen a show like this or don't really realize this is an option, right? So they don't think about it, and they kind of follow the path of least resistance, which is, I'll go down to my local, fast food restaurant, and I'm going to, they're hiring, I'll sign up, I'll take the job. I'm going to school. I mean, it's sort of like they think that as a teenager, there are sort of teenager jobs. And there are things that, and I don't mean to denigrate that. Like, my daughter worked at Chick-fil-A, and it was a great experience. And that, as we've talked about on this channel, it's like, it's actually a really good first place to work for a lot of reasons. Fast food service industry, there's nothing wrong with that. We're just saying, don't assume that's your only option if that doesn't really get your motor running, or you would rather, you've got a passion, or you've got an interest in something else that you would rather do. Like, you like to write code, or you want to get into graphic design, or you want to, you love animals. You might want to be working in a pet care, whatever. So there's so many options. But one of the things too that I've noticed is, and you mentioned it, how to be impressed, and people who might see themselves in you. So they might see themselves in you because that was their passion when they were young. But the opposite is also true. They might see you having the passion they now have as a young person, and they didn't discover it because maybe they were trapped in that little, like, matrix of, I have to go to and they didn't figure it out till they were 35. And they see a young person coming to them, and there's something that comes over you as an adult, at least for me, and I've talked to a lot of people like this, that if it took you a lot of stumbling and tripping into something, and you're a decent person, okay, you're not, like, I had to pay my dues, that kind of person. you see somebody young, and you want to help them not have the delay, right? You want to say, like, oh, wow, this is awesome that you're taking advantage of opportunity to do this now. I wish I had known. I wish I had been dialed into my own interest in this at your age. This is fantastic. You might get like a ton of enthusiasm, like where somebody almost wants to take you under their wing and mentor you because they had the experience of having to wait and maybe paid a price. So that's something else to keep in mind, that, adults, we're not so scary, first of all. And no. we do have that, and especially if it's somebody that you admire, chances are they do have some kind of desire to share that passion with you.
Yeah. And also for kids who listen to this, or for parents to convey to their kids, adults have all the same doubts and fears and uncertainties that kids do.
Yes.
And I think that's really important for young people to realize, because you can have adults tell you this and you don't believe it, but it's really true. Like,
Yep.
adults feel the same amount of imposter syndrome sending a cold email or a cold DM that a kid does. And it has nothing to do with the age. It's just human nature. When you look up to somebody, it makes you feel nervous to reach out to them. And like, what if they don't respond? What if they think I'm weird for asking? What if my message is an imposition? What if they read my message and the way I phrased it offends them somehow, or they think I sound dumb because I didn't phrase it correctly, and then they don't ever want to talk to me again. Like, adults go through all of these mental spirals too. It's not a young person thing, it's a human psychology thing.
That is a really good point.
And that's important for every piece of interacting with the adult world as a young person. Like, you have imposter syndrome because you think you're not doing a good job in your first job. Your boss probably has imposter syndrome too, because they think their boss doesn't think they're doing a good job. And then their boss, like if you're in a big enough company like Chick-fil-A where there's layers and layers and layers of people, their boss probably has imposter syndrome. Like, it's not any deficit of yours because you're young. And once you realize that and you hear adults talking about that and you kind of wrap your head around it, because at least in my experience, it took a while for me to be like, wait a second, like, these people mean it when they say that. They're not just trying to make me feel good. They actually feel all this stuff too. It makes it a lot easier to navigate.
We're talking about, and we're talking to kids as if, I hate to say kids, okay, teens. I know they don't usually like that term. I'm not a kid. I'm not a kid. But
I kind of like it when people call me a kid.
Oh, do you? Yeah. We're talking as if there's something that they are, passionate about or interested in. But this is a really good point here. Most people are not passionate about anything, and that is probably more true of today's teenagers than in the past. I think it's a combination of factors. I think it's a combination of, right at this moment in time, maybe, COVID kind of kept people locked up. So that's a problem. But also when you have access to so much information about so many things, and it's easy to get distracted, and it's hard to really focus on like one thing that you're passionate about. The other thing is just being busy with school and things. Sometimes people just like, I don't know. You need a fair amount of constructive boredom to decide what actually interests you. And kids today are not really bored, but ironically, that doesn't necessarily feed into a deep interest in something. So maybe it's a whole separate show about how to do that. But let's also, if you wouldn't mind, as we're talking, like, think about, when people say, I want to network and I want to get hired and I want to get a good first job, but I honestly don't have a passion, or I'm interested, like equally interested in 3 or 4 things a little bit.
I have thoughts on this. I have
awesome, because this is super common. I mean, I think it's, it's great to say to the person, if you're really interested in X and you have a hero and you whatever, do this and go, because they're going to be so impressed. And that is so true. But I also imagine there are people in the audience going, I don't have a hero and I don't have a passion. So and I don't like, I kind of like this, but I don't know.
Yeah. Don't get caught up in the idea of passion. Don't get tangled in it, because not everybody has a clear-cut single passion, and it's a fallacy to think that you need one. There are probably more people in the world that don't have a distinct passion than people who do, or at least a singular passion. Right. And they live very successful and happy and fulfilling lives. And the idea that you have to have one thing that you're passionate about is a myth that is perpetuated by the education system. Yeah. Very much so. It's like you're going to spend your secondary years figuring out what you're passionate about, and then you're going to go to college and like get the degree that you need to go do that for 40 years of a career. And it's like you're going to go change the world with your passion. It's this sort of hype language that gets just thrown around in a very cheap way by every college promotional flyer in existence. And it's actually really harmful, I think, because it puts so much pressure on kids, but it's sort of like forcing them into this like very shallow, commercialized version of a hero's journey, kind of, but like without any depth or real self-knowledge. It's just sort of like, take a personality test and then here's the path that you fit on best, so that must be your passion. And like, obviously it's not that uh quite that shallow and systematized, but it kind of is. Like, it's not an inaccurate summary. So,
Well, and you don't have to have a passion in your work either.
right.
So, I mean, one thing that I told my kids is if you're having trouble with the whole like what is my specific interest that could possibly lead to work, I said go about it a little differently and think about your life. Think about the kind of lifestyle you like to live. Do you want to live in a city? Do you want to live in the country? Do you like what kind of people do you like to be around in terms of what their interests might be, or like what kind of topics do you want to talk about? Do you want to spend time outdoors? Not, think in terms more of like if you close your eyes and picture yourself 20 years from now, where are you living and how are you living at sort of a high level? Or go ahead, get as granular as you want. I want a little English cottage with a garden around, whatever. But then work your way back. And I think Mike Rowe did a video about this. Like, find the job or the work life that supports the life that you want and see how you can get started on that path. So if and maybe even look to what you're already good at. Right. And I was like, I'm already pretty good at whatever. And I want this kind of life. So what's a good way to start out using the thing I'm good at that'll get me to earn enough, have a stable enough existence that I can have that life. So that could be maybe another way to go about it.
Yeah. And one counterpoint that I want to make to that, because I think there are different angles for different types of personalities. And I think it's important to paint a holistic picture of this.
Yeah.
Also, don't be afraid of thinking about like, how can I design a kind of a blended like work and life and all these different components that I want? Like, how can I fit all of them together in this like really holistic way that makes me happy to get up every day and go through the entirety of my existence from waking up in the morning to going to bed at night, which is very much how I think about my work and my career. Like, I've never been the type of person that's liked a really segmented, like from 9 to 5, I do this. And then from 5 till 9 is like my time. I like having my life and my work be very almost seamlessly interconnected with each other. So that's always been really important for me. And that's really how I've thought about this. And so when you're thinking about like what types of things can support the life that I want, don't necessarily think of work either as being this very separate, segmented thing, because it doesn't have to be. But anyway, to go back to the passion question, because I have a couple of thoughts on this still that I haven't touched on yet. Don't get too hung up on passion. Lean instead into curiosity, meaning there are a lot of things probably that the average kid is at least moderately curious about. Like, you see something and it piques your interest enough for you to be like, I wonder how that works. Or, I wonder what that would be like. And I think it's really detrimental to your overall development, both as a person and as a professional, to get too hung up on passion, because it stifles the process that is often required to find the thing that you want to do. And this is something that I grappled with a lot over the first few years of my career. When I was first starting out, I leaned into the curiosity thing very much. I think we talked about this a little bit in our last show. I shadowed a chiropractor and I worked on a vegetable farm and I taught writing classes and I did some coaching and I worked at like a local farm supply store and like got into small business, and I shadowed filmmakers and thought I wanted to be a photographer, and I was hitting up all these different photographers to go take them out to lunch and pick their brains on how to become a photographer. But I had all these different paths that I thought I was going down, and they were all just curiosities that I was chasing. And some of them were actually close to being a hit. Some of them were things that, like, especially the photography thing, I went pretty far down that road. I was buying equipment and I was lining up people to do free shoots to build my portfolio. Like, I thought that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
And eventually it turned out to be a thing that was cool, but not something, it wasn't where I was deriving the bulk of my meaning, or where I felt like I could have the biggest impact or do the most meaningful work. And so it just like started to feel less important than the other stuff that I was doing. So it sort of naturally slipped away. But I don't regret the time I spent on that at all, because it taught me a lot about what I like and what I don't like. Plus now I have a nice camera that I can use for my own personal use, which is cool.
Exactly.
But I learned a lot about what I like and what I don't. And I networked with some people who actually did sort of circuitously bring me around to connecting more with people who did end up being more like long-term career connections. And I made some friends doing this who I'm friends with to this day. And I made connections where if I ever have photography questions or videography questions, I can go reach out to these people and ask them for advice. Hey, I'm trying to like set up this type of thing. What would you recommend? Or I'm like working on this type of project. Do you know anybody who could help me with this in this city? It's a really valuable network to have. And it was a really important part of the process in getting me to where I am now, which is much closer to finding a passion. But I still am very careful about using that word, because while I'm very passionate about what I do now, I don't think about it as a singular passion. Like I talk all the time about education, and I am pretty clearly incredibly passionate about it, but I don't see education as being like my only lifelong passion and this is what I'm going to do until the day I die. I think there are going to be many other things that I also talk about and write about, and other types of work and projects that I do as well. Some of them are already known to me. Like I'm pretty sure there's a short list of things where I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm going to do that at some point. But there are probably also things I haven't even discovered yet. And so I think when kids get too fixated on this singular passion idea, it actually stifles the necessary emergent process of taking the meandering path that leads you to your final destination. When you try to find the straightest path and you just go down on it, it might, like you just go down the path, it might actually be taking you in the complete opposite direction of where you need to go. But like it looked like the straight one, so you're taking it. Sometimes you have to trust the meandering path. And you have to trust that it's like not going to be a straight line to get you where you want to go, but that's okay. And I think for trying stuff as a young person, like just pick the thing you're most curious about and go learn about that. And if in a week you've changed your mind, that's still a net positive. It's still more beneficial to you than if you'd spent that week sitting around waiting to take action, because you will have more real world tangible data about what you like and what you don't, and also how to discover that than you ever could have possibly had if you did nothing. So I think the whole passion idea actually kind of needs to get discarded.
I totally agree. But as far as the meandering goes, I think it is a choice, and it carries with it still, unfortunately, I think we're working our way out of that, but it does carry with it a certain measure of risk. I think it's a worthwhile one in terms of what kind of person you're going to become, but I think it's worth noting that we still live in a time where people still look at a linear resume. They still, by and large, I mean, you don't need to have a chronological resume, but if you're not going to have a chrono one, then people are looking for a shorthand, a way to look at a piece of paper and understand your meandering. And that's kind of challenging. And so like, I mean, I meandered all over the place, right? And when I sit and I talk to people and I explain the process and my thought process and what happened, they go, oh my God, that makes total sense. Like then it makes complete sense to them when I explain it, when I have the opportunity to get in front of a human being, then they get it. When I have to put it together on paper, it's no. And so it's I would say be calculated even in your meandering, in the sense that like document along the way, like write yourself a little note. I'm doing this now and I'm, this is what I hope to get out of it or whatever, just so that later, if you have to sit down and present it to somebody, you have as much data, you have as much information to put it together in a format that makes a portfolio, something that makes sense to the next person you're networking with. Because like, know why you're doing it, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I agree.
Your reasons are fine. I'm not saying have like someone else's reasons. I'm just saying know what they are and maybe make a little note to yourself so that you don't feel put on the spot later. If somebody says, well, why did you do that? And then you did this, you'll already have your answer ready.
I agree with that. I definitely wouldn't let that impact
No.
meandering though. And I think there's a couple, this is something I've spent a ton of time thinking about, because when I was working with Praxis for years doing coaching, this is one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about, is this sort of sense making of the career journey that leads you up to the point that you're in, where you're applying for a job and you have to explain everything that's come before it. And it really helps to think about it as a narrative arc where you have like past, present, future.
Yes.
And you're painting this picture of like, all of these things that I've done in the past have brought me to this point where I'm here now, and where this job makes like the perfect sense for me to be doing. Like, this is the thing for me. And then this is where it's taking me. Like, this is the vision for where I'm headed. And it's really important to have that cohesive story, both because it's how humans make sense of things. So it makes more sense to somebody when you can describe where you are in story format. We're story creatures, but also it's compelling to be able to say, like, I actually have a vision for where I'm going, instead of just being kind of going through the motions and like, yeah, this job description looked cool and I really have no idea what happens next. Like, it's okay if you don't know the specifics, but like having some sense of purpose for where you're going is helpful. But I think, like, in working with literally hundreds of young people on making sense of their resumes up to the point of applying for a job and trying to piece all of this past together, it's actually pretty easy, I think, to draw a narrative arc through a bunch of disparate and disjointed things. I think there are a couple specific scenarios where it does make sense to be careful. I think if you're a chronic job hunter or job hopper and you never stay anywhere more than 6 months, you better have a really good story for why that's the case. Like, unless you're doing something where it's like, I'm doing like a 2-year sort of exploration of these like different types of jobs, and this is very intentional thing where I'm building experience and like I'm intentionally like trying these 4 different types of areas. Like, unless you have a story like that, I think it's really important to be careful about a long string of job hops, because it signals a lack of commitment, which makes people a lot less likely to want to invest resources into training you if they think they're going to spend 3 months training you and you're only going to be there for 6 months before you bounce. But besides that, I think most jumps are highly explainable with the right narrative arc. And I think there's 2. I'm actually really glad that you brought this up, because I think there are 2 things that I would encourage people to do when they're starting to build their resume. And one is just continually come back to just revisiting where you've been up to this point and the narrative that's developing. And it's totally okay to not know exactly how you're going to frame it, because a lot of it does hinge on the job that you're applying for. Like, if you're applying for a job as a writer, you might have a very different narrative arc that you're painting about your journey becoming a storyteller and a more empathetic and compassionate person who can like understand other people. And you're building these writing skills throughout these different jobs, and they led you to realize that actually you want to be a writer, and that's why you're applying for this position, which is a totally different narrative arc to what you'd paint if you're applying for a customer service job. And some of the same things, like the empathy and the connection, apply, but you want to be drawing this expanding arc around learning how to handle people and how to talk to different types of people, and how much joy it brings you to help people solve their problems. And you realize that you want to do that full time. And then this company has a really cool product and they're working with interesting people, and you would love to support their customers in solving their problems and help them use this product more effectively. Like that, your narrative arc shifts depending on the outcome that you're trying to create. But I think a lot of people are afraid to really tap into this like very deep narrative, almost hero's journey like understanding of their development. I think it feels a little fluffy and a little unnecessary, but I think it's actually really important. So I would tell people to definitely go back to that. And I would also tell people to document what they're doing, not just from a like note-taking standpoint, but build a portfolio around your experiences. If you have a really cool experience, write a blog post about it, record a video showing how you do your work. Like, having a portfolio is way more valuable than a resume. And if you can attach that instead of a resume, and for a lot of job applications you can, you're going to go straight to the top of the pile, because 1, you're different, but 2, people can understand what you bring to the table much better. A resume is actually a really terrible proxy for understanding what capacities people bring to the
I
table.
completely agree. I can't stand resumes. I
They're
really hate
awful.
them.
It's
If I were a
awful.
hiring professional, I would probably intentionally not use them. I would say, like, I don't want a resume. Don't send me one. Send me evidence of your work. Like, show me a portfolio, show me references, like bring me references, anything visual, give me a scenario, like write me a story. I would so much rather that than a stupid resume. I mean, give me a list. You can just give me like a list of like, tell me the places you've worked and roughly how long you worked there. But I don't want you to sit with the stupid bullet points and the keywords and all that nonsense, because half of it is, I mean, it's just not understandable. But I want to make sure we touch on the sort of elephant in the room, because the show is Success Without School. For those teens who are not coming out of they're not in a traditional high school. They're maybe homeschooled, or they're doing a hybrid thing. They're going to community college, doing something else. Now, I think on balance, it's a net positive in the eyes of the employer. I really do, because first of all, your availability is much greater. Like, you have more hours, most likely. Or at least it's more flexible. Your schedule is flexible. People like flexibility in schedules. We already know, contrary to popular myth, that homeschooled kids tend to have better sort of interpersonal skills in terms of maturity and able to communicate like with adults like they are adults, and better eye contact, all kinds of things. But on the off chance that they are running into somebody who just is like never encountered a homeschooled kid before, and they're even some jobs will say must be in school. Like, they'll have things like, only if you're actively in school. We won't, even Chick-fil-A won't hire somebody, 16 or older, if they're not actually in school or can demonstrate that they're in school. You can't be a dropout. So, they ask, if you say you're homeschooled, they love that. But my point is, you might run into somebody who's like, what's your deal? So what do you have to say about that? Like, zero fear? I have no fear. I'm assuming you don't, like, for the kids.
I honestly
think it's a
wouldn't
plus.
worry about those people. Like, yeah, you're going to run into people who don't understand. Don't waste your time. You're going to run into so many people who do understand and are really excited to work with you. I'd say the same for dropouts too. I actually didn't know that Chick-fil-A didn't hire dropouts. I find that very interesting, but I'm pretty sure
they want to see, they want to see that you're in school, and they consider it to be a plus if you have good grades. So sometimes even on their application, I think they ask for your GPA. So I remember when we were filling ours out, and I was like, really? Now, I mean, she had a high GPA, even with homeschooling, her GPA was high. That wasn't hard to do. But I just remember thinking, like, that's obviously a high value for them. They also offer a scholarship to students. I think it's like a $10,000 scholarship you can apply for, needs-based, that will help you go to college. So they're very education focused, but very much in the establishment education world. And I don't know what it would be if you said, I'm not in school and I'm 16, and I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't want to go. I don't want to say they don't hire dropouts, but I have a feeling you'd need to explain.
Got it. That I wouldn't be afraid of at all. I think, again, it's all about constructing the narrative. It's all about being able to tell a compelling story about why you're doing what you're doing, which, if you're taking a risk or a leap, like leaving school or going through an alternative program, you probably have a very compelling story anyway. So you just have to figure out how to tell it. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about that at all. I think that there are so many places that you wouldn't run into those problems. And it's just like, yeah, the world might push back a little bit, but are you willing to push harder? Cool. You'll be fine.
I agree. I think people are actually just so shocked by confidence, like real sincere confidence, that you don't have anything to worry about. But I know that that's something that, parents, I think, who haven't been homeschooling and now they're thinking of pulling their kids out for high school, middle school, or high school, it's been a concern that's been expressed to me. Well, won't employers look down their nose, or they won't know that they really know things? And like, why won't they know? Because they won't have, a transcript, or they won't have this record or whatever. I'm like, they'll have the human standing right in front of them, speaking to them intelligently, articulately, like in a mature tone and making eye contact. That's what they're going to have, because that's typically what happens. And yet we get so stuck in these paradigms right? That's why we have the show, is to kind of help people like break out of your, ask yourself, where did I get this idea? Did you get it from reality, or did you get it from a movie, or did you get it from like some assumption that you had, or some relative that looked down their nose at you, or whatever? Like, or is it just because it's different than your experience, so you assume? It doesn't comport with reality. That's kind of my point, is don't worry about it, because as you said, you might run into those people and those people don't matter, because behind them there are 10 more people who are going to be like, homeschool kid, wait, where? So I wouldn't worry about it. That's me. But
yeah, I agree. What else is important? I feel like there's more on the like practical side of networking that we haven't necessarily touched on yet. We've gotten kind of deep in the weeds with a lot of like kind of foundational level theory, but not necessarily practical advice.
Well, I think that, there's like an urban rural divide, in the sense that like for kids who are growing up in an urban and a suburban world, even if, because let's face it, you can have all the access to the internet you want, but you're still going to need to know who's around me. And if you want a job and you don't want to do it literally online, you're going to need to like possibly go meet with people or find people who are near you. And the options are probably more numerous if you live in an environment that has more of a professional, like for networking, right? As we typically think of it. So I think if you're a kid who lives more in a rural area, you might be thinking like, well, where do I have to go a certain distance to even find people to talk to, or to say, oh, can I come and talk to you? It's going to be a project.
Use the internet. One, there are tons of people that you can network with without ever having to be in person, depending on the type of work that you want to do or whatever types of things you're curious about. Let's say that you want to be a photographer. Start combing the internet for local photographers. If your friend does a photo shoot, look and see what photographer they use. Look for local hashtags on Instagram, because Instagram is the platform for finding photographers. Go look and see what's in your area. Start following these people. You don't have to drive an hour to go find the photographer. You can send them a message and start building the relationship via Instagram. If you sent a local photographer a message on Instagram and you're like, hey, I'm, 16 and I'm a sophomore in high school and I think I want to be a photographer when I graduate and I would love to shadow some local photographers. Is that something that you would be open to? Probably you'll get a yes. And then, you can coordinate to find a shoot. Like, you've already done the work of building the connection. It's not like you're driving an hour or whatever to go make the initial connection. Then you can coordinate like, hey, there's this shoot that's happening that's actually only 30 minutes from me. And like, I can go shadow them and I can ask a bunch of questions and maybe we can set up some photography lessons. Another thing that's really helpful actually as a pretense for meeting people, especially if you have a more generic set of interests. And I know I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but this is important. You don't necessarily have to have an ask that's like a specific question or a specific request in a practical sense of like, I want to shadow you. You can also engineer requests. So you could do a project where you interview X amount of people in different fields that you're interested in, and then you write a paper on it. And people are usually quite happy to answer any interview questions like that. You could launch a podcast and just interview people that you find interesting. And again, people are more likely actually to say yes to a young person's podcast because they're excited to help a young person who's building a cool thing. A podcast is a very ambitious project for a young person. It's also incredibly doable. It's a very accessible project, but it's ambitious. A lot of high schoolers are too scared to, or don't think that's possible, or are too stuck in the ideation phase and haven't figured out how to take action yet.
Yeah.
So it's relatively uncommon to get an interview request from a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old saying, hey, I've launched this podcast. Here's the link. Would love to have you on. Let me know if that's something that you'd be open to. So you can engineer ways to meet a lot of people if you have broader interests and you just want to meet cool people and talk to them about what they do. Why don't you start a podcast series where you interview professionals about their careers, and you start a show that's actually for other teens where they can learn more about different types of careers, and then you interview everybody. You send them a social media friend request after the interview. So like now they're in your network. You send them like a great follow-up with the with the interview recording. If you have additional questions that you want to ask them, you can include that ask in when you send them the follow-up. It's like, hey, here's the recording, here's like the cover image and stuff that you can use to promote on social media. Thank you so much for joining the show. I actually have some more questions. Would you be open to like a 15-minute phone call where I can ask you about X and Y that we didn't have a chance to cover on the show? Boom, immediate credibility. People know that you're worth their time because you're actually doing stuff, and they will be so happy to help. And that's an amazing way actually to build long-term network connections. Interviewing people, yeah, like some of them will be misses. Like you'll have a great interview and then you won't build the network connection, but it's a great way to meet people and build network connections where you can follow up and you can wish them happy birthday, and you can, you know, read an article and say, hey, I saw this and it made me think of you. I thought you might appreciate this. Just keep that network connection alive. And it could prove to be incredibly useful. Imagine if you did that for a year while you were in high school and you graduated high school with 50 plus professionals. You have all of their email addresses. They all know who you are. They're all impressed by you, so they'd be happy to do you a favor. And you have all of those people in your back pocket to ask for introductions and ask for advice and ask for feedback on things that you're working for and who you could reach out to about jobs. Like imagine having that in your network when you're graduating from high school. That's such a leg up over pretty much all of the competition, and it's incredibly doable. You just need a webcam and a microphone and an internet connection and an email address. That's and a YouTube channel, which is like takes 5 minutes to set up.
And that, you know, that's certainly one way that, I mean, that's super creative. And I think that's a fantastic idea. Like I wish there were ideas like that when I was younger, but we didn't have the internet and we didn't have all those things. So guys, you know, teenagers out there, you're very fortunate you have the internet. But I mean, it's a plus and a minus, as we know, because it's also part of why they tend to be, you know, kind of distracted and all that. But there's also the old school way. My nephew did something, and he's now probably, I would say he might be your age, maybe a little older. He got a job as a valet. He was parking cars. But he was very specific about where he got the job for the parking of the cars. He made a point of applying for jobs that I think, I don't know if it was like a club or, you know, it was like a fancy restaurant. It was some place where he knew that people in the industry he wanted to go into, which was commercial real estate, frequented. And so being, you know, his number one skill really is his communication ability. The kid is just really good at relating to people and communicating with people, you know, way more than some of the other kind of more like hard skills, although he's still got that. It was just, that's where he really shines. And he kind of knew that. And he said, all right, I'm going to find a way to be around the kind of people I want to be around, even if it's not in that capacity at all. I'm parking their cars, but I'm going to make a point of, you know, they're going to remember me. I'm going to make sure they remember me. So, you know, what does that mean? That means you are, you know, quick, you're hustling, you're very personable, you're extremely clean cut. You know, you say please and thank you and sir and ma'am, and, you know, like all these kind of, just the being very professional in your demeanor with an eagerness that people like. And if you know some things about the specific people, which he took pains to do, so he started noticing who are the particular people who come here, what are their names. I mean, you could find out who they are, right? It's not that difficult. And he would research them and figure out who they were and then say, you know, like, oh, sir, I am such a fan of your company. And you know, it's such an honor to meet you and park your car for you. And I mean, this actually happened where he introduced himself to somebody who was a big wig at Cushman & Wakefield or whatever, and introduced himself, said, you know, this is my name and someday I'm going to work for you. You know, like that is my dream. Someday I want to work for you. And he's like, when you graduate, give me a call. Like he was memorable. He made sure that he was memorable. And long story short, ended up getting a job at that company. So, I mean, that's another kind of way to do it, is say like, well, where can I put myself? Can I be a waiter? Can I be a car parker? Can I do something in a different capacity, but impress people with my drive to work for them that way and show them that I'm a person they want on their team because of that particular skill.
I love that.
Yeah, that's so what he did. Yeah.
There's a lot to be said too for more general networking. Like you don't even have to know what industry you want to go into. You just know that you want to be like, you want to make money, you want to work with people who want to make money. You're really excited to work in some kind of big business. You have no idea what it is. Like you don't even have to have interest as specific as your nephews were.
Right.
For it to be valuable to go work in a place where you're meeting successful people and being memorable. I think that's such a phenomenal story. And I think that that general broad networking of, I just want to meet a lot of interesting people and I don't have a specific passion or specific interest, that's great too. And I think I love that he said, someday I'm going to work for you.
Right.
That gets you so far, quite honestly. Being super certain in your desire to accomplish something. Like if he had said, you know, someday I would just like love to work with you and I really hope that someday I get the chance to interview with your company, the guy would be like, yeah, I hope so too. Have a great night. It's not, nobody's going to believe you if you don't believe you.
That's right.
But if you believe you and you say, no, someday I'm going to do this.
Yeah. You get that intensity about it, you know, like
rising how malleable the world around you is. And young people don't realize this. Most adults don't realize this. And that's why young people don't realize it. Yep. Most young people don't realize this because nobody's ever told them. They've gone through this school system that spent 12 years perpetuating the idea that there's all these rules you have to follow and all these systems you have to go through, and you have to go through the right channel in the right order at the right time before you can even have the opportunity present itself to get where you want to go. And then there's still all these hoops you have to jump through. And so many adults, they like, it's baked into the culture. The pop culture references that you see are all about like, you know, life is hard and I'm kind of beaten down by the system and I just have to, you know, like get up in the morning and go do this work because that's what you do until you can retire and get your Social Security. And nobody ever tells you that there's ways out of that are incredibly easy. You just have to step off the conveyor belt and then everybody gets out of your way because they're like, oh, look, this guy's moving. Like we're going to let him through. But that's actually how the world works. Like people are so receptive to you saying, no, I want this and I'm going to get it. And they're like, okay, that's awesome. Like, here's my business card. Give me a call. When you've done this thing, we'll talk. And like some of it is a lack of competition thing because it's so rare. People take you seriously when you actually do it. But the extent to which you differentiate yourself and the extent to which you actually catapult yourself down the path that you want to go on, when you are definitive about the fact that you're going to get there, is really surprising to most people, including most adults. And it's especially easy, I think, for kids, because again, it's even more shocking when you see that level of certainty and confidence in a young person. Mm-hmm. And until somebody tells them that, they're not gonna know, or until they see somebody do it, until they happen to try it. Like they happen to say something really bold and somebody responds positively. And then they're like, wait a second, I can keep doing that. But it's so, like, that is the magic secret. If you learn that one, you're good.
Exactly. And I do think there's so much to be optimistic about for this particular generation in terms of the options they have. And I was just watching a video, I think it was yesterday, and I talked to my guest yesterday about it. It was about the Truman Show, and it was about the habitus and, you know, what we get into and all that. And at the end of the video, it said people are already, the cracks are showing. Now you can look at the negative side of the cracks they're showing that. But the positive is people are opting out. They're opting out of the sort of that traditional matrix. They're becoming entrepreneurs. They're doing more work from home. They're doing more, you know, global nomad kind of thing, where they just say, I'm going to work on my terms. I'm going to work when and where I want, and create my own opportunities. I think there's a lot. There's a lot to be optimistic about in that respect for young people who are looking to network and, you know, get hired to do something. I would like to suggest that they consider themselves the person they also want to appeal to. Like, consider hiring yourself. The thing you talked about with starting the podcast, the thing that you've talked about with, you know, like doing your own blog and things like that. There's no reason you can't pick something. I think one of the commenters said, pick something that really interests you and monetize it. There are opportunities galore to be your own boss and then use your networking for building that up, so that those people, it's not just that you're appealing to them to learn from them and so forth, but you also are hoping that they start to see you as a potential client or somebody who's important to their business. And I think this is an opportunity that young people have today that is relatively new compared, let's say, with Generation X, as an example. The opportunity to say that little matrix that entrapped my parents doesn't have to get me to. I can and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. There are plenty of jobs to go do, and that's fine. I'm just saying be conscious about it. Like if you want to do that, then make it so that it's your choice, right? But also consider that you are your own boss too, and network with people with that in mind. Perhaps if you're not so sure, there's somebody you want to hire you. So it's just kind of like shifting the mindset a little bit towards networking for personal growth and development, networking for entrepreneurship. It's a little bit different than getting hired by the employer with the salary or the paycheck or whatever. It's kind of also think that way.
Yeah.
Is, I guess, what I was saying.
Definitely. And also, you don't have to know which type of networking you're doing to start networking. Just go out and meet people you think are interesting. Go to events that you think are cool. Like I did some stuff when I was a high schooler that were real duds. Like I took a genealogy course when I was like 15, and I was the only person there under 65. And I was like, well, I'm probably not going to make a ton of friends or business connections here because none of these people are my peers nor hiring. But I just did it for fun, and it was a great use of my time. But like, it wasn't a networking thing, but I did it because I thought it was interesting and I learned a lot.
Right.
And like that kind of thing, they go do stuff that you think is interesting, and some of it's going to pan out and some of it's not. And that's totally fine. But go to places that you think are cool, the people that you have shared interests with would probably be. And it can be as simple as you really love knitting, and so you go to a knitting circle at a local yarn store and you find somebody else who's also really interested in knitting, and lo and behold also really cares about I don't know, providing warm baby clothes to impoverished mothers, or maybe mothers who are in like women's shelters because they're escaping some really horrible situation and they don't have anywhere else to go. Right. And you and this new friend concoct this idea that you guys are going to start a group of people who knits like baby hats and baby socks, and you're going to like donate them to local women's shelters. And it turns into this whole big project where you guys are meeting other people who are doing similar things, and you get this whole army of knitters behind you, and you start getting features in local knitting shops and yarn shops where people are sharing what you're doing. And then some like handworking magazine reaches out to you and wants to do a feature, and like all of a sudden you've got this credibility in this area that you find interesting, knitting, that like you've built something cool, and you've met a bunch of people who are also share multiple interests and passions that you have. And it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to say, well, I think that I want to be well known in the knitting world, so I'm going to go to a knitting circle and try to find somebody to work with. You don't have to know all of those things before you start. It doesn't have to be prescriptive. You're just following your interests and letting the next yes and the next yes unfold as you go through this process. And like that could lead to a whole career. You could start a nonprofit and like work full time for your nonprofit, or you could teach knitting classes, or you could do some other type of advocacy work, or you could make knitting books about like all the cute baby hats and baby clothes that you've created patterns for, and you could sell your knitting books. Like there's all different types of things that you can do that stem from chasing this one interest. Or you might go take a knitting class and be like, everybody here is really boring. I think we go take a cooking class instead. Like I don't like it here. And that's fine too. But you need to just like follow those initial interests, follow the little yeses, and over time they tend to compound.
Yes. Agreed. And, ultimately, your first job is just your first job.
Oh yeah.
So
it's a footnote.
It will be. So no, I mean, so take a chance. Yeah. You never know. I mean, if you get an opportunity and it seems like, you know what, this could be interesting, but I wasn't what I set out, just check it out. Maybe like you said, it could, as long as you can tell that story, as long as you can fit it into the story arc, you're fine. But I mean, I've done laundry at a motel. One of my first jobs was doing laundry at a motel because that's what I could get when I was 17. And I wanted to live on Cape Cod so badly with my friends in the summer. And that was like, I had, they're like, you have no skills to do anything. And they needed somebody to do laundry at a cheesy motel. So I did laundry at a cheesy motel, but I did it too well. Hannah, I did it too fast. And the other maids and people were like, you're not going to make, even my boss was like, you're not going to make any money finishing all the laundry. Like, so I would sit there and read books and I did laundry, and fold it really fast. And I taught myself how to fold the fitted sheets. To this day, I'm a witch. Everyone thinks I'm a witch because I can fold fitted sheets so perfectly. But I would get on my bike and I would ride to the main street in Hyannis. And I would go into like every single restaurant and store and like apply for jobs, like every single one. And they kept saying, no, no, no. And I had my heart set on this one Army Navy, like jean store. It was called the Jeanery. It doesn't exist anymore, and I kept going in and asking for a job, And the guy's like, you have no experience. You have no retail experience. Like, why would I hire you? I had lots of other kinds of experiences, but not that. So one day I was so like just stubborn. I was going to get this stupid job. And I hung out in the shoe department, just like hung around. And this lady thought I worked there. So she started asking me questions. So I helped her. And she's like, oh, can you get me a size, whatever? And I said, yeah, I'll find somebody for you who can do that. I don't work here. And she said, well, you should work here. And so I guess, so the boss guy was walking by and I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I didn't say it exactly that, but she's like, you should work here. She should work here. She's good at this, whatever. And he's like, oh my God, you're like a bad penny. What is your deal? And finally, he said, I give you 1 week. He said, I'm going to take you on as a trial. We're going to see how this goes, but I'm not committing beyond a week because you just have no experience. How do I know you can do this? By the end of the week, he never even mentioned that the week was up. He reassigned me to like the women's and children's department, had me in there. By the end of the summer, I was the assistant manager of the women's and kids department. And he was begging me not to go to college so that I would stay there and run his stupid Oshkosh Bagosh section of his store. Because I would snooker all these grandparents into buying like elaborate Oshkosh Bagosh outfits with like overalls with flowers, little matching shirts, and little matching socks and little shoes. And I had these whole, like, I was selling hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of Oshkosh to these tourists. And he was like, you really have to go to college? I'm like, yeah, I got to go. But thank you so much for the opportunity. It was funny. That's a story I love to tell because I just wouldn't. It's not even that I wanted to work in that store. It's like I hated the way he said, you can't. Like, I don't want you because you can't do. And I was like, but I can. Like, I knew I could. And so I guess I tell the story, like, so anybody else listening, like, if you know you can do it, don't let somebody else tell you can't. Go do it. That was my one like claim to fame. But yes, I was doing laundry professionally. Honor student, folding sheets. So yeah, take a chance. You never know. Pays the bills till you can go, be the bad penny. Go be the bad penny.
Agreed.
Anyway, well, that's our show for today. I think we'll have to come back into next week, actually, Hannah. I'm out of town on Tuesday. So we'll be back the week after. Cool. But we'll put something together for the time after that, goes into some other cool stuff about success without schools. If you guys in the audience have things that you would like to hear, from us about, please drop it in the comments or, send us a DM or something on Twitter. At Rebel Educator for Hannah, at Deb_Filman for me. And we'll see, we'll talk about it because we want to make sure we cover things in a way that helps you, right? Anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that's it. Besides, I'll miss our show next week, but
I know I will too, but it's for my anniversary. So I need, like some time to just have an anniversary.
Absolutely.
Like, remember the important things in life, right?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Thank you guys. Thanks everybody for coming. And what?
Have a great week.
Yeah, you too. I will try. I'm going to walk on a beach. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk on sand.
That sounds delightful.
All right, you guys, thanks for coming. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you in 2 weeks. All right, take care.